More than 5 million M1 rifles were built for the United States Army during the Second World War, and one man's name is on all of them. Not a company, not a design bureau. A French-Canadian mill hand with no engineering degree, working on a government salary in a corner of Springfield Armory. George Patton would later call it the greatest battle implement ever devised. An army board, a rifle on a bench, and John Garand, born Jean Cantius Garand, standing behind it, watching the gas-operated semi-automatic action feed itself. 8 rounds loaded from an en-bloc clip, one after another, and the shooter never once touches a bolt. What the Army did with that rifle took another 9 years, and at the end of it, there was a bill in Congress with his name on it, and a number. $100,000. He never saw a dollar of it. The rifle only makes sense once you know whose hands built it. He was born Jean Cantius Garand on the 1st of January 1888 in Saint-Rémi, Quebec, one of 12 children on a farm. His mother died in 1899. His father moved the family south to Jewett City, Connecticut, joining the stream of Francophone Canadians going into the New England textile mills. That is where he was educated, not in a lecture hall, in a mill. In 1899, the mills ran on children. A bobbin boy walked the aisles between machines that never stopped, pulling full bobbins off the spinning frames and pushing empty ones on. The air was thick with cotton dust, and the belts and shafts beside him would take a hand off a boy who reached at the wrong moment. There was no schooling in it. There was, however, an enormous amount of machinery running all day in front of a child who turned out to be interested. In the years that followed, he picked up forging, welding, and steam engineering. Above all, he picked up the feel of a tolerance, which is the thing that separates a machinist from a man who merely owns tools. A part is either within a few thousandths of an inch of what the drawing says, or it is scrap, and after enough years, your hands know the difference before the gauge does. By 1909, he was 21 and working for Brown & Sharp in Providence, a firm that built precision gauges. A gauge has exactly one purpose. It tells you whether a part is right. So the boy who had learned to hold tolerances by hand was now being paid to measure them at a company whose entire reputation rested on being more exact than anybody else. His formal engineering education was essentially nothing. He was self-taught, and everything he understood with his hands first. In a few years, he would be handed a problem that every trained ordnance engineer in the world had already failed to solve. The war brought him to Washington, to the Bureau of Standards, where his grade was Master Gauge Expert at $1,800 a year. On the 4th of November 1919, he came to Springfield Armory. He went on to the rolls there as a skilled laborer, a title well below the work. A soldier fires. The shot's own energy cycles the gas-operated action, throwing out the spent case, stripping a fresh round off the en-bloc clip, and closing the bolt again, so that the rifle reloads itself. Pull the trigger, and it is ready to fire again. It is not a machine gun. One pull, one shot. But the man with a bolt-action rifle has to break his position, work the handle up, back, forward, and down, and settle again between every single round. The self-loader does not. On a range, that is a convenience. In a firefight, where the question is how many aimed rounds you can put downrange before the other man puts his, it is something else entirely. The First World War had made that arithmetic brutally clear, and afterwards the Ordnance Department went looking. Through the 1920s, it invited inventors in and tested what they brought. John Pedersen, Thompson, Berthier, a designer named White, a Danish rifle called the Bang. The specification was punishing. Semi-automatic, chambered for the service cartridge already sitting in the arsenal, light enough to carry all day, and reliable without special lubricants or hand-selected ammunition, meaning it had to work wet, work filthy, and work in the hands of a 19-year-old who had never seen one before. Clever rifles met some of those conditions. For more than a decade, none of them met all. Garand's answer was gas operation, His early rifles used what was called a gas trap, catching propellant gas at the muzzle in a cup arrangement to drive the action back. It worked. It also fouled. The parts took a beating, and in October of 1931, the Army pulled his .30 caliber rifle out of testing with a cracked bolt. He built a new bolt. The rifle went back the following month under a new designation, and it began doing everything that was asked of it. And then, before any of that could matter, he won with a different rifle entirely, and it destroyed 4 years of his work. The fight was over the cartridge. John Pedersen had developed a shorter, lighter round, the .276, built specifically for self-loading rifles, and it made the engineering enormously easier. Garand had built a .276 version of his own design, designated the T3E2 in Army trials, and it beat the competition by a distance. In the first week of January 1932, the Army's own boards declared Garand's .276 the winner and recommended it for adoption. Then it reached the desk of the Chief of Staff. 7 weeks later, the whole thing was taken away from him. General Douglas MacArthur refused the caliber change. The Army had millions of rounds of .30-06 in millions of crates, machine guns chambered for it, and factories tooled for it. In the depths of the Depression, it was not going to throw all of that away for a modest gain in a rifle it had not yet adopted. On the 25th of February 1932, the order went out that all work on the .276 was to cease immediately and completely. MacArthur was not wrong. He was almost certainly right. But the rifle Garand had just spent years perfecting was built around a cartridge that had ceased to exist. The longer, harder-hitting .30-06 would beat that action apart if he simply dropped it in. The gas system had to be recalculated. The receiver had to be strengthened. All of it had to come in under the weight a man could carry all day. He went back to the .30 caliber rifle. It came through its trials, and in August of 1933 it was adopted and designated the United States Rifle, caliber .30, M1. In April of 1934, the Armory's model shop began hand-building 80 of them, and that May, 75 went out for service trials. 3 years after that, on the 21st of July 1937, the first true production rifle, serial number 81, went through proof firing, function firing, and accuracy firing, and passed all 3. That September, Springfield began delivering, at a rate of 10 rifles a day. 10 a day for a rifle that would end up numbering in the millions. And here it gets harder for him rather than easier, because the rifles that went out the door first were not the rifles that had passed the trials. Roughly 50,000 early M1s still carried the old gas trap system, with all the fouling and stress that came with it. The Marine Corps found that out the hard way. The Corps had wanted a self-loading rifle badly. It had ordered 400 M1s back in 1936 and paid $54,100 for them. The first 100 reached the Philadelphia depot in March of 1938 and were promptly sent back because the Army needed them more. The rest arrived that September. When the Marines inspected them the following February, more than 8 in 10 had pitted bores, most of it light, some of it bad enough to condemn the barrel. So the Corps did something quietly devastating. It did not reject the rifle. It simply declined to give it to the men who would have to fight with it. It issued the rifle to units in garrison, where a fouled gas system was an inconvenience rather than a death sentence, and it waited for Springfield to fix the gas system. Garand's rifle had been held back again, this time by the service that wanted it most. The fix did not come from him alone. On the 26th of October 1939, an Ordnance Department board recommended abandoning the gas trap entirely in favor of a single hole drilled through the barrel wall. It sat at a calculated point in the bullet's travel, bleeding off a small, measured jet of gas to do the work. No trap, no cup, far less to foul. It reached production rifles in 1940, and most gas trap rifles were eventually called back and rebuilt, though some went to war unaltered. The Corps had already fired nearly 250,000 rounds through that first batch of 400, and had come away recording serious doubts about whether the rifle was ready. In November of 1940, it put the new version up against the Johnson, the Winchester, and the old M1903 Springfield. This time, the Garand finished first. In early 1941, the Commandant formally adopted it, and still, the Corps did not clear it for combat units until the 26th of June, 1942. Which is why, when the 1st Marine Division went ashore at Guadalcanal that August, most of those men were still carrying bolt-action Springfields. The M1 arrived on that island in October, in the hands of Army infantry. Marines began trading and scrounging them off the soldiers who had them, and did it so persistently that Army officers were eventually posted at the docks to take the rifles back off departing Marines. That is the clearest verdict the rifle ever got. Not a board's report. Men in a jungle, getting hold of one however they could. What the men carrying it found was the thing the Army had been chasing since 1918. A rifleman with an M1 could put roughly twice as many aimed rounds downrange as a rifleman with a bolt action, because he never came off the target between shots. He stayed in position. His cheek stayed on the stock, his eye stayed where it was, and the rifle did the rest. Multiply that by a squad, and by every squad in a line, and the arithmetic of a firefight changes. Not because any individual American was a better shot than the man opposite him, but because the rifle no longer had to be worked between shots. On the 26th of January 1945, George Patton wrote a letter from 3rd Army Headquarters to the Chief of Ordnance. Its first line reads, "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." By then, more than 4 million had been built, the majority at Springfield Armory, and more than 500,000 by Winchester, who had taken on production as the war scaled beyond what any single factory could manage. He kept working, and the rifle is only half of what he built. The receiver slot had to be cut on a curved surface, which nobody had managed to do at production speed, and Springfield was getting 100 a day out of a machine. Garand built the machine that did 750. A barrel threading method of his own took output from 50 an hour to 125, on equipment he designed for a fraction of what the standard thread grinder cost. In July of 1943, Colonel Earl McFarland, the superintendent of the Armory, set all of this down in a letter. Tooling work that raised production, cut waste, and improved accuracy across the entire arsenal, none of which had anything to do with the rifle's design. The man who designed the rifle also rebuilt the factory around it, and he was paid for it. This is where the legend usually goes wrong. Garand did not work for free. He came into federal service at $1,800 a year. By 1942, as chief engineer at Springfield Armory, he was earning $8,000 a year, and in 1945, he was given an in-grade increase for meritorious service. In today's money, that $8,000 is worth roughly $160,000. He was a well-paid federal engineer, promoted steadily, straight through the Depression, on merit. What he did not get was a share of what he made. That was not theft. It was the arrangement. Intellectual property created by a federal employee in the course of his employment belongs to the government. Garand held the patents through development and signed every right in the invention over to the United States in 1936, which is what every man at that armory did. He knew the terms when he took the job, and he never publicly complained about them. But some people thought those terms had stopped being fair somewhere around the 4 millionth rifle. On the 9th of July 1941, Congressman Charles Clayson of Massachusetts introduced a private bill in the House of Representatives It was numbered House Resolution 5276. Its purpose was to authorize the Treasury to pay John C. Garand $100,000. In the bill's own language, additional remuneration for the very valuable services he had rendered in the development and the production of the Garand M1 semi-automatic rifle. Set that number against the object it was meant to reward. More than 5 million M1 rifles were eventually built. $100,000 spread across them comes to about 2 cents a rifle. Set it against the man, too. $100,000 was more than 12 years of the salary he would be earning at the top of the armory, and he had spent 22 years climbing to get there. The median American home around then was worth about $3,000. This was a street of houses outright. For a mill boy from Jewett City, it was the difference between a comfortable pension and never having to think about money again. The bill did not pass. It was raised and blocked, and raised again, and blocked again, and nothing was ever paid. There was no scandal. Nobody voted it down in front of a gallery. It died quietly, in a Congress with a war to fund. He went back to the bench. What he did receive was recognition. The Advertising Club of Springfield gave him the Pynchon Medal in 1939, the city's highest civic honor, awarded in no small part because the rifle contract had kept Springfield's workers employed through the worst years of the Depression. And on the 28th of March 1944, he stood in the White House while Franklin Roosevelt presented him with the Medal for Merit. He was one of the first 2 civilians in the country to receive it. The other was a physicist who had helped give the Navy radar. Medals, not money. He stayed at Springfield Armory until 1953, when he retired at 65, 34 years after he had come down from a gauge bench in Washington. The rifle that bore his name was eventually replaced in American service by the M14 in 1958, a design that itself grew out of the M1's action, which is its own kind of tribute. The arrangement he had made with the government he never showed any interest in reopening. He lived out his life in Springfield, in the town his rifle had kept employed, and died there on the 16th of February 1974 at the age of 86. An army board once stood and counted the rounds coming out of one man's rifle, and then ordered 80 more to be sure. They built more than 5 million. Nobody ever counted what that was worth to the man who drew it. The one time Congress tried to put a figure on it, about 2 cents a rifle, the bill died without a sound. And John Garand got up the next morning and went to work. If you want more stories from the archive, subscribe to the channel.